I never thought I'd end up in this position, posting on Reddit about my best friend's marriage, but here I am. Mark, 30M, and I, 31M, have been best friends since we were kids. We've been through breakups, job losses, family stuff, you name it, we've dealt with it together. He's like a brother to me, which is why the situation is killing me inside. Mark's been married to Sarah, 28F, for 2 years now. From the outside, it looks like the perfect marriage, but that's far from the truth. The whole thing is a sham, and I'm the only one who knows it. If I say something, it could destroy Mark's life. But if I don't, I'm part of a lie and I can't live with that anymore. I remember when Mark first introduced me to Sarah about 3 years ago. Mark had just started a new job, and he met Sarah through some mutual friends. At first, she seemed nice enough, but something about her never sat right with me. I couldn't put my finger on it, so I just chalked it up to being overprotective of Mark. I kept my distance and let him be happy. Things moved fast between them, way too fast in my opinion. They got engaged after just 6 months of dating. I thought it was crazy, but Mark was head over heels. Who was I to burst his bubble? The guy had been through a lot of bad relationships, and he finally found someone he thought was the one, so I bit my tongue and went along with it. During the wedding planning, though, cracks started to show. Sarah was always a bit condescending toward Mark, but he shrugged it off as normal wedding stress. He'd laugh about it, saying things like, Sarah's just really detail-oriented, or she's got a lot on her plate with the wedding stuff, but I could see it wasn't just stress. It was how she treated him, like he was an afterthought, like he wasn't good enough for her. One big red flag popped up about a month before the wedding. We were at Mark's bachelor party, and Sarah and I ended up talking alone for a bit. She told me she wasn't sure if she was ready to settle down yet, but felt like she had invested too much to back out now. I didn't know what to make of it. I wanted to believe she was just having cold feet, but something about the way she said it felt off. I told myself not to overthink it. Everyone gets nervous before their wedding, right? After the wedding, things seemed fine for a while, or at least that's what I thought. Then, one night, I accidentally overheard Sarah on the phone with one of her friends. She was laughing and said something like, I don't love Mark that way, but at least I've got stability now. It was a punch to the gut. Mark had no idea. He was still totally in love with her, always doing things to make her happy, thinking they had this perfect life. But Sarah didn't feel the same way. At first, I didn't know what to do. I wanted to tell Mark, but how could I drop something like that on him without concrete proof? I figured I'd keep an eye on things, see if I was overreacting. Maybe it was just a weird conversation, and I was reading too much into it. But then things started getting worse. Sarah began spending more time with a guy from her office, someone she called an old friend. The way she talked about him, the way her face lit up when she mentioned his name, made my gut twist. It wasn't long before I noticed she was meeting up with him regularly. Mark, of course, was completely oblivious. He trusted her completely and didn't think twice about her spending time with this guy. Couldn't let it go, so I started digging. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but every time I saw Sarah and this guy together, my suspicions grew. Eventually, a mutual friend confirmed it. Sarah had been talking to this guy long before the wedding. Their relationship was complicated, according to our friend. It was like a bomb had gone off in my head. I wanted to scream at Mark, to tell him everything right then and there, but I didn't have enough evidence to prove anything. And what if I was wrong? Meanwhile, Sarah's behavior at home got worse. She started treating Mark like he was a burden. She criticized everything he did, from the way he worked to how he spent his free time. Their arguments became more frequent, and Mark, bless his heart, thought he was the problem. He kept telling me how he was trying to do better, to make Sarah happy. It was painful to watch. He had no idea she didn't care about him the way he cared about her. The final straw came last week. We were at a party with a bunch of mutual friends, and I saw Sarah openly flirting with her work friend right in front of everyone. Mark was in the next room, completely unaware. That's when I knew I couldn't stay quiet anymore. This wasn't just a bad feeling. It was real, and Mark was going to get hurt if I didn't do something. I couldn't stay quiet anymore, so I decided to confront Sarah. I didn't go in guns blazing. I wanted to give her a chance to explain herself before talking to Mark. One evening, when Mark wasn't around, I brought it up casually. I told her I'd noticed things seemed tense between her and Mark lately. She just laughed it off and said, "Oh, it's nothing. Every couple has their ups and downs." Her tone was dismissive, like I was imagining things. Then, she hit me with a line I'll never forget. "Mark's a great guy, but let's be real. He's not exactly my dream man." That laugh, that smug attitude, it got under my skin. It was like she knew she had all the power in the situation and wasn't worried about getting caught. A few days later, I overheard her on the phone again. This time, it was even worse. She told her friend, "I'm just waiting for the right moment to leave. I can't do this forever." It was clear as day she was planning her exit. Mark had no idea, and she was just biding her time. Mark, meanwhile, was completely unaware of what was going on. He had been under a lot of stress at work, trying to hit deadlines and manage a big project. On top of that, he was trying to make things better with Sarah. He planned a surprise weekend getaway for them, thinking they needed some time alone to reconnect. When he told Sarah about it, she shot it down immediately. She claimed she was too busy with work, but I knew better. I'm almost certain she had plans with Tom that weekend. Mark tried to talk to Sarah about the distance he was feeling between them, but she gaslighted him hard. She told him he was imagining things, that everything was fine, and that he was just being paranoid because of his work stress. Mark, always the good guy, ended up apologizing to her. It was painful to watch. She had him so twisted up in his own head that he couldn't see what was right in front of him. Then, I found out through a mutual friend that Sarah and Tom had been going on weekend trips together. She had told Mark she was visiting her family, but it was another lie. The betrayal was so blatant that I couldn't believe she thought she'd get away with it. The final straw for me came on Mark's birthday. He had planned a small gathering at their place and was excited about it, hoping it might rekindle some warmth between them. But Sarah barely acknowledged the day. She didn't get him a gift, didn't plan anything, and barely made an effort to be present. The very next night, however, Sarah went out to a party thrown by Tom. She was all dressed up, smiling in pictures with him while Mark stayed home, unaware. When Mark told me about his birthday disappointment, his voice was filled with confusion and hurt. That was it for me. I couldn't stay silent any longer. I decided to gather as much evidence as I could before talking to Mark. I went through Sarah's social media, finding posts and comments that made her relationship with Tom seem far more than just friendly. I managed to confirm, through mutual friends, that they had been spending nights together at Tom's place and going on trips. It wasn't just speculation anymore. I had proof. When I finally sat down with Mark to tell him, it was one of the hardest conversations I've ever had. I told him everything, what I had seen, heard, and confirmed. He looked shocked at first, like he couldn't believe it. Then, he got defensive, trying to rationalize Sarah's behavior. She'd never cheat on me, he said, his voice shaky. She's just been stressed with work. Maybe you're misreading things. I could see him wrestling with the truth, torn between loyalty to Sarah and the evidence I was presenting. So I showed him everything. I laid out the screenshots, the receipts, and the timelines. Slowly, the disbelief on his face gave way to anger and pain. He sat in silence, staring at the evidence in front of him. Why didn't she just tell me? He finally whispered, his voice cracking. Why did she even marry me if this was how she felt? I didn't know what to say. I could see the weight of it all crashing down on him, the realization that his marriage had been built on lies. He kept flipping through the screenshots, rereading messages and receipts, as if hoping he'd find something to prove me wrong. After what felt like an eternity, Mark said, I need to hear it from her. He called Sarah right then and there, telling her to come home immediately. She sounded surprised on the phone but agreed to come back. I offered to leave, giving him space to confront her, but he asked me to stay. When Sarah arrived, she looked annoyed, not worried, as if this was an inconvenience for her. When Mark confronted her, she tried to deny everything at first. Tom and I are just friends, she said, rolling her eyes. You're really going to believe these out-of-context screenshots over me? Mark didn't back down. He brought up the trips she claimed were visits to her family, the texts, and the way she had been acting distant for months. Slowly, Sarah's calm demeanor started to crack. Fine, she snapped. Maybe I've been spending time with Tom, but it's not what you think. I've been talking to him because I can't talk to you. You're always working or stressed out. I felt alone, Mark. Her voice broke, and for a second, I thought she might actually take responsibility. But then she turned the tables. If you'd been more attentive, I wouldn't have had to go to Tom. This is on you, Mark, she said, her tone sharp. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She wasn't even trying to apologize. She was blaming Mark for her betrayal. Mark just stared at her, his face a mixture of anger and heartbreak. Mark finally found his voice, though it was shaky. You're blaming me? I've been working so hard to support us, to build a life for us. I've always tried to make you happy, Sarah. But you've been lying to me this whole time. Sneaking around with him. Sarah crossed her arms and scoffed. I wasn't sneaking. Tom was there for me when you weren't, Mark. I needed someone, and you were too busy with your deadlines and projects to even notice. I couldn't take it anymore. Are you serious right now? I interjected, unable to keep silent. Mark has done everything for you. He's done everything to make you happy. And instead of talking to him, you go behind his back with Tom? How is that his fault? Sarah turned to glare at me. This has nothing to do with you. You're just here stirring up trouble. Like always. Mark held up a hand, cutting off our argument. Stop, he said, his voice quiet but firm. Sarah, I need you to be honest with me. Do you even love me? Or was this marriage just convenient for you? For a moment, Sarah said nothing. Her eyes darted between Mark and me, her expression hard to read. Finally, she sighed and looked down. I don't know, she admitted. I thought I did, but things changed. I didn't want to hurt you, Mark, But I've been feeling trapped for a long time. Mark's shoulders slumped, and I could see the fight drain out of him. You should have told me, he said quietly. Instead, you lied to me, humiliated me, and broke my trust. I deserve better than this. The room fell silent, the weight of Mark's words hanging in the air. Sarah didn't respond. She just stood there, her arms crossed, as if she were waiting for Mark to tell her what to do next. Mark took a deep breath, steadying himself. You need to leave, Sarah, he said firmly. I can't do this anymore. This marriage is over. Sarah's eyes widened, and for a moment, I thought she might argue. But then, as if realizing the finality in Mark's voice, she nodded. Fine, she said curtly. I'll pack some things and stay at my parents' house for now. Mark didn't respond, and Sarah walked out of the room, her steps heavy with defeat. The door to their bedroom slammed shut a moment later, leaving Mark and me alone in the tense silence. He sat down heavily on the couch, his head in his hands. I never thought it would end like this, he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. I sat down beside him, unsure of what to say. You did the right thing, Mark, I said after a moment. You deserve someone who's honest with you, someone who truly loves you. It hurts now, but this is the first step to moving forward. Mark nodded but didn't look up. It just feels like I failed, he admitted. Like I wasn't enough. No, I said firmly. This isn't on you. You gave her everything, Mark. This is on her. She made her choices, and now she has to live with the consequences. He was quiet for a while, his breathing steady but his shoulders slumped with the weight of everything that had happened. Thank you, he finally said, for telling me, for being here. I don't know what I would have done without you. You don't have to thank me, I replied. I just want you to be okay. You'll get through this. I know you will. Over the next few weeks, Mark's life began to shift dramatically. He officially filed for divorce, a decision that wasn't easy but was necessary for his peace of mind. Sarah moved out permanently, taking her things and leaving behind the remnants of a broken marriage. Mark seemed lighter, though the pain of betrayal was still etched into his face. One evening, we met up at a small coffee shop to catch up. Mark looked better than he had in months, his eyes clearer, his posture more relaxed. He stirred his coffee absent-mindedly as he spoke. I started seeing a therapist, he said. At first, I didn't think it would help, but it's been eye-opening. I've been carrying so much guilt, blaming myself for everything. But my therapist is helping me see that this wasn't my fault. Sarah made her choices, and I don't have to carry the weight of them anymore. That's amazing, Mark, I said, genuinely relieved. I'm really proud of you for doing that. It's not easy to face all of this, let alone work through it. He smiled faintly. Thanks. It's a process, but I'm starting to feel like myself again. Therapy's been helping me see that I've been putting everyone else first for so long that I forgot about my own needs. I'm learning how to prioritize myself for a change. We talked for hours that night, and for the first time in a long time, Mark laughed. A genuine, carefree laugh. It was a small but significant step forward. Mark began focusing on rebuilding his life. He picked up old hobbies he'd abandoned during his marriage, cycling, woodworking, and even learning to play the guitar. He reconnected with friends he'd lost touch with and started exploring the idea of moving to a new city for a fresh start. Meanwhile, Sarah and Tom's relationship quickly began to unravel. Word spread that Tom had been unfaithful, cheating on Sarah with another coworker. The irony wasn't lost on anyone, least of all Mark, who found out through mutual friends. Turns out, Tom isn't Prince Charming after all, Mark said one day with a wry smile. There was no bitterness in his tone, just a quiet acceptance of the way things had unfolded. Sarah reached out to Mark a few weeks later, begging for another chance. She claimed she'd made a mistake, that she wanted to work things out, but Mark didn't even entertain the idea. I've already closed that chapter, he told me when he recounted the conversation. She made her choices, and I'm done paying for them. As the months went by, Mark continued to heal. He finalized his divorce and began laying the foundation for a new, healthier future. He took a promotion at work that came with the opportunity to travel, something he'd always dreamed of, but had put on hold during his marriage. One day, he told me about a solo trip he was planning to a national park he'd always wanted to visit. It's time I do something for myself, he said, his eyes gleaming with excitement. Watching Mark come back to life was inspiring. He was no longer the shell of a man Sarah had left behind. He was stronger, more confident, and finally at peace with the past.